Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. Hey, what's up, 8-Bit crew? Today is Thursday, October 8th, 2020, and this is episode 11 of the 8-Bit Instructor. Welcome back, everybody. I've got a wonderful show lined up for you. Later on, Cooney Horvath joins me and discusses a lot of really interesting brain science, science of learning stuff. We talk about text, speech, images, the idea of multitasking, using error, and using stories to help people learn. It was a great conversation, and it actually ended up running for a pretty good long time. So I'm going to go through the intro stuff real quick so that we can get to that interview. First, a few news and updates. The first one from Quizlet. If you ever use Quizlet, it is an online kind of flashcard. You can do games and quizzes to learn vocabulary and that kind of stuff. They have integrated a new folder system, so if you have classes set up in Quizlet, you don't have all of your activities all in one place. You can create folders within each individual class just to help you organize it better. So there's a quick little update for Quizlet. Another short little update from Wakelet. Wakelet is now integrating Adobe Spark stuff into their collections. So if you use Adobe Spark in any way, you can add portfolio stuff, you can add videos and all that. All that stuff that you can do in Adobe Spark is now integrated right into Wakelet. So it's a cool feature that is going on there. Finally, Google has a major announcement that came out. If any of you follow Google, you have probably seen this because it's all over the place. Google is rebranding G Suite into what they're now calling Google Workspace. So one of the major updates that goes along with this is that they are going to be integrating the user experience a lot. So you've seen some of that stuff possibly rolled out recently with Google Meet videos being integrated into Gmail. So they're making everything a lot more integrated along with each other, so it's not a bunch of separate apps. They're also kind of creating a new brand identity with that, which has been a little controversial. Some people are a little upset about some of the logo changes and all that. So like the familiar Gmail logo with the envelope and red M is no longer going to be that. It's going to be that 4-color Google M, which I'm not too keen about, but it's not a huge deal. So that's really it for news and updates. Real quick, we're going to open the treasure chest, and then we're going to get to the interview. So my treasure chest today is not a tip. It's actually just a book that I wanted to share. It's the book Stop Talking, Start Influencing, 12 Insights from Brain Science to Make Your Message Stick. And it's written by my guest today, Cooney Horvath. It's 12 principles that dig into the way the brain learns. I read it, and it was an incredible read for me. It really changed the way that I look at things that I do in my class, and we talk a good bit about that. So I'm going to link that book in the show notes. It's definitely one of my at least top 5 books of education that I have read in recent years. Probably easily up into the top 3 even. So if you haven't read that, definitely check that out. Stop Talking, Start Influencing by Cooney Horvath. And with that being said, we're going to move right on into the boss battle. Up next, Jared and I talk brain science. Today I have with me Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath, who's a PhD and an MED. He's a neuroscientist, an educator, and the author of the best-selling book, Stop Talking, Start Influencing, 12 Insights from Brain Science to Make Your Message Stick. He's conducted research and lectured at Harvard University, Harvard Medical School, the University of Melbourne, and over 200 schools internationally. He currently serves as the director of LME Global, a team dedicated to bringing the latest brain and behavioral research to teachers, students, and parents alike. So, Jared, thanks for being on here.
No, thank you so much for having me on. This will be good.
I guess I should say good morning, right? It's good.
Yeah, so I'm on the other side of the world, so it's 7 a.m. over here.
Nice. Well, sorry you had to get up so early.
No, it's what you get used to. When you're on this side of the world, you kind of figure everyone in the UK and in the US is on a totally different time scale, so you get up at 4 a.m. just to make sure everything works internationally. Right, so we're kind of used to the early mornings over here.
I had to wrap my head around the fact that it's cold there.
It's cold and somewhat miserable. So it's weird. We're in the middle of winter, which has been mild, but now the rain has just started coming. Mm-hmm. So on the entire East Coast, we're kind of getting the tail end of it. But they're starting to get floods now in New South Wales, and homes are getting washed into the sea.
Oh.
This year, between the fires and the COVID and this stuff, man, we don't know. I just quit. The next couple months are going to be very weird.
Yeah. Hopefully 2021 will come back in a better mood.
This is what we said about 2020. We're like, this is going to be the year that resets everything. Nope, this is just as bad as everything else.
I mean, it might reset it in some other kind of way. But
this could be the hard reset we've been expecting, where everything changes after this one.
Well, cool. Before we get into some of the meat stuff, I like to just have some fun and do some fun little questions. So I got a little would you rather question to throw out here to you.
All right.
I think in today's context, this one might actually be kind of interesting. So, would you rather have one wish granted today or 3 wishes granted 5 years from now?
Oh, jeez. I know what I'm supposed to say. Actually, you know what? 5 years doesn't... as I get older, 5 years is just a drop in the bucket, so I can wait 5 years for my 3 wishes.
All right.
When I was 20, I probably would have said, no, give it to me now, but... Now it seems like I blink and 5 years goes past. So I'll take my 3 wishes in 5 years.
All right. The little delayed gratification, right?
Yeah. How about you? What would you do?
Well, see, so it's hard because, the whole current world situation and stuff going on like in America.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those things where I almost want to say one wish right now just to get some stuff over and done with,
Calm everything down. Yeah. Stability. That's not a bad idea.
Any other time I would wait 5 years to get 3 wishes, but I don't know. I just because this year has just seemed to hammer one thing after another. I might just take it right now and say let's be done with something.
Just hit the pause button. My wish is everything just stops.
Right. Back
to normal for a bit. Everything's gonna be cool again after this.
Yeah. So you do a lot of educational research type stuff, right?
Yeah. So kind of from brain, neuroscience, psych stuff, all that fun stuff.
So what's the story of how you got to that point? What got you kind of heading down that direction?
Yeah, so education's always been my bag. So I was a teacher originally, but back when I was teaching, that's when the neuroscience, it was the decade of the brain. Okay. So that's when everyone was really talking brain this, brain that. And I thought, all right, well, if I can understand the brain, I'll probably be a better teacher. So I had this idea that I'm just going to go back to school for a year or two, kind of get my degrees figured out and then come back and teach. Mm-hmm. But 2 years has now become kind of 15 years. And you just kind of, one thing leads to the next and you kind of keep chasing new ideas. But in that whole time, the entire kind of field I've been studying is what we call the science of learning. Mm-hmm. So this is where I've jumped from neuroscience through psychology, behavioral economics, artificial intelligence, anytime someone's talking about learning, I'll try and dive into that, figure that out. And I do that all so I can bring it back to schools and say, here's what it means for us as teachers. Here's what it means for our students. Here's how we can use it. Here's how they can use it. Here's the good stuff. Here's the trash. So really, even though I'm still kind of what I call stuck in the black hole of academia, mm-hmm. I'm still my passion is still in the classroom. and I'm lucky enough to kind of bridge those two worlds. But eventually, give me another about 5 years of this, and I'll be back in the classroom. Okay. There's no way I don't end up back there. That's still my only passion.
Awesome. So you wrote this book, Stop Talking, Start Influencing, which is kind of the brain science behind how we learn, right?
Yeah. So my idea with this one was, let's take 12 principles of learning. So learning is weird in that depending on what field you're talking about, it's totally different. So if you're talking only about the brain versus computers versus the classroom, the definition of learning is just wildly different. So trying to bridge all these things is strange. So what I do with this book is I came up with 12 what we'll call learning principles. So these are nuggets of learning that make sense in all the different fields. So it's the same whether you're talking about computers, the brain, psychology, the classroom. All right. So whatever your context is, these will make sense. So yeah, each chapter just goes deeply into each one of those principles and says, here's how it's working in the brain, here's how it's working behaviorally, here's how we can use it in the classroom. Okay. It's kind of 12 nuggets that I guarantee you will not change for the next 1,000 years of our understanding of learning. Mm-hmm. These things are set in stone, so we can at least get these without having to worry about all the fluff of research around it.
Right. Yeah, I came across it, I think it was back maybe around January or so. You did an interview on, I believe it was Jake Miller's podcast.
Yeah.
And so listening to that segment, I was like, oh, this is definitely something that I'm into. I kind of like that same kind of stuff of learning how that works, kind of the underlying foundations behind what we do to help reinforce kind of what I'm doing, And that's
class. What I've always believe that once you know why something works, then you can start to own it. So I think there's a lot of ideas that people like, do this. And that's cool, but until you tell me the mechanism, I can't I can follow your instructions, but once you tell me why it works, now I can kind of personalize it, adapt it. Right. So that was kind of my point with this, is not just say do this, it's to say here's why this process would work. And now that you get the deeper, now play with it. You don't need anyone to tell you how to use it. Now you get to say, okay, I get it, so what do I want to do with it? Yeah,
and I think I remember, I can't remember exactly what part, but I remember reading one of the chapters and thinking, I remember this being something that I got in like one of my education courses, but then learning that kind of foundational, like here's what the brain actually does. And now all of a sudden, like it clicked and it made sense of why we do that kind of practical side of it.
Yeah, we do a lot of stuff in education on faith, where it's that's what we've always done or that's what we were taught. But once you go into the mechanism, you go, oh, okay, so that wasn't just magic. It wasn't just somebody said this in 1970 and we've been doing it since. There's a reason for it. And the scary thing is a lot of the things we do, we still don't have that reason. So the more we can kind of lock these reasons down and say, all right, well, we know this is going to work. We know the mechanisms behind this. This is solid practice. And then we can start to separate the other ones and go, well, this, we don't really know why that would work. So can we play around it? We don't really have an answer for this one. So is it good? Is it bad? Can we tweak it? Can we change it? What do we want to do with it?
All right. So I kind of pulled out, we could easily talk about all 12 principles, but that would probably run pretty long. So I tried to pull out a couple of them that were really intriguing to me to kind of like discuss and maybe dive a little bit into and kind of tease those chapters of that book. So you start off, I think in the first couple of chapters, I think kind of coincide a little bit, the idea of text and speech and even, visuals and how all of those kind of interact together.
Yeah.
So what, break it down a little bit about how that kind of works.
So I think we can kind of I was with you. The first three chapters kind of fit together. So the first chapter looks at this principle. It says essentially text and speech don't mix. Mm-hmm. And the idea being that the way the human brain processes the silent reading voice is it turns out it processes it the same way as it does an out loud speaking voice. So when you're listening to me talk right now, if I could image your brain, it would look a certain way. Now, if I shut my voice up and you just started reading something to yourself, your brain would look almost exactly the same as it looks right now. Because as far as your brain is concerned, that little voice you hear in your head when you read, that's an out loud voice to it. It processes it through sound, through the same networks, which means essentially in the brain we get a clash. human beings can't read while listening to somebody speak at the same time. There's just not enough neural real estate to handle it. It's a bottleneck. Okay. So we start to think, okay, let's already draw this back to how many lectures have I given with, say, a PowerPoint slide with text while I'm talking over it. We know the students now can't do this, so they're trying to jump back and forth, losing information. How many times have I given handouts and with text and kids are trying to read while I'm teaching over it? So we kind of start with this idea of, okay, what I'm presenting and how I'm presenting it starts to matter. So if I can't use text, is there something that I can present while I'm teaching, while I'm speaking, that won't clash? And here's where chapter 2 comes in, and we start to learn about the power of simple images, where you start to realize, okay, the brain, to process pure vision, uses a totally different network than the speech networks. And when both these networks are going at the same time, speech and images, they combine and you get one of these, what we call summative processes, where, what is that saying? The whole is more than the sum of its parts. This is it, is when you hear something while seeing something, you learn more from each than you would in isolation, each of those individually. Okay. So this is why TV works so damn well. It just combines these two things, and all of a sudden our memory goes, oh, 2 inputs, let's learn a super amount. So we start to learn, all right, cool. So we can't read and listen at the same time, so we start to strip text, but we can see images. And so this brings up interesting questions about graphs and how many images and what types we use. But beyond that, we just say, okay, images and speech work. And then the third chapter then kind of comes in and talks about organization, where it says, all right, beyond all of this, the way the brain makes memories is largely contextual. And so one of the elements to every memory we've ever created is space, is a 3-dimensional location for everything we've ever learned, which means the more predictable we can make an organization, a layout, a format, the easier it is for the brain to learn it, to predict it, and to start sussing information out of it. So here's where we start to learn that, all right, if we're going to use something like PowerPoint, the more consistent we can use, format each slide so that after 2 or 3 slides, everyone knows, okay, there will always be an image here, there will always be a keyword here, there will always be a reference here. When they know exactly where to look, that frees up cognitive energy, boosts their memory, and all of a sudden they can start to learn easier and better. As opposed to each slide, I'm going to put a picture on the left, now it's going to be on the right, now there's going to be 10 pictures on the bottom. Changing it up starts to make it harder. They have to decode it. So this is a perfect example of speech and text don't work, speech and images do, and the layout matters. Okay. And now we can dive into the brain, figure out the mechanisms, and say, here's why that's all happening. So we know it's not us. It's not magic. It's not something we invented. It's happening neurologically. So now how can we play with that with our slides, with our handouts, with our presentations, things like that?
So, one of the things I kind of thought about with all of that too, would you say that formatting a slide a certain way for maybe different segments of class, would that kind of trigger certain responses in them?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So let's imagine. So think about like you probably do it on your podcast, but I'm thinking about like news shows where they have that different kind of like tag for each segment, where it's like the local news, and they have the same song that they play every time, and then they have In the Nation, and they play their same song. The more you can give those cues to say, okay, each segment has its own style, its own flavor, but then within each segment, that style and flavor is consistent across days. Okay. That just helps even more for us to recognize where we at and organizing as the information comes in. This belongs here, boom. So absolutely, if you've got, say, 3 segments in your class where you have intro and review. Well, I guess we do 4 segments: intro and review, the didactic portion, the activity portion, and then the debrief portion. Yeah, if you organize each of those differently, where your slide set, your handouts were boom, specific but unique for each one, that only makes it even easier for people to make their memories and start to recognize and organize where things go. Oh, I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so this next thing, okay, this is what I argue with students about all the time. All right, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? Is
this the music? Listening to music while studying?
This is part of it, along with the idea of multitasking. So, multitasking, fact or myth?
Let me guess. The students think they can do it, right?
Oh, every student is just fully convinced that they know how to multitask.
Oh, that's the funniest thing in the world to me. That's it. The big joke is the people who think they can do it well are typically the people who do it the worst. They just have no clue how poorly they're doing. Long story short, let's make it as simple as possible. No human being in the history of the world has been able to multitask. It's just not. It's a cognitive issue. So it's not a matter of skill where if I just work hard enough, I can get good at it. It's a brain problem. And so if you think about it this way, the reasoning is here is in order to perform any task, to actually connect with it, you have to attend to it. You have to pay attention to it. Now, when we attend to anything, what we do is we have to set up what's called our attention filter. So this determines, think about it. So all this information, we're getting tons of things coming into the brain at any one moment. So we have to sift through that to pay attention to things. So the filter, our attention filter says, okay, that's relevant, that gets in, and it blocks out anything irrelevant. Problem. You've only got one attention filter slot in your brain. It's a little nugget right behind your left eyebrow here, which means you can only attend to one thing at a time. If you ever try and do two things at once, the best you can do, you can't do them simultaneously, is the best you can do is just jump quickly back and forth between them. But each time you jump between tasks, you have to take out your old attention filter and put in your new one. Now that switch, that filter switch takes time, about 0.2 seconds. During this time, your brain goes black. It processes nothing. So when you're multitasking and jumping back and forth, you're going slower and slower and slower. You're just losing time every time you switch your attention. But more importantly, every time you switch between tasks, you start to bleed the filters slightly together, so you start to confuse the two concepts together, and now all of a sudden your accuracy and your memory start to tank. Your understanding, your comprehension goes through the floor. Now, the big joke is because you only have one attention filter, and a lot of people link consciousness to that filter, you don't recognize half of this. Whenever you're jumping back and forth, all you know is your momentary filter, so it feels totally seamless to you. But we can measure all this stuff in the background and go, no, you're dropping like a rock. You're going slower, your understanding, your memory, everything is just going down. So the sad fact is, you just think about it like that, is the brain is like a TV. You can only have one. You can have 1 million stations on a TV, but you can only be watching one at a time. So if you ever try and do two things at once, the best you can do is flip back and forth between stations. In which case, you're going to be missing information. You're going to be screwing things up. So I love the idea, but it doesn't work. Now, to be fair, I promise you, there's going to be some people listening to this right now going, "Well, wait a second. I drove to work this morning while singing along to the radio. That's multitasking, right?" Technically, no. So you can do two things at once, but it only works so long as one of those things you're doing is on what we call autopilot mode. We'll just make it real simple, which means when you can only do one focused task at a time. So when you're driving, singing along to the radio, one of those things you're not paying attention to, you've just got on autopilot. And 99% of the time, it's your driving. So you're really only focused on the singing. The driving is just happening. And we know this because as soon as you have to find a parking spot or an address or a house number, what's the first thing you do? You turn off your radio, and now your focus goes to the driving. So you can do two things at once, but one of those is going to be on autopilot. And when you have something on autopilot, you're not learning from it, you're not changing it, you're not tweaking it, it's just going. So this is where, so you're still not multitasking, you're just putting something on the back burner while going about your business on something else. So it'd almost be like you're aware of it, but you're not really processing it, I guess. Yeah, a whole different part of the brain runs it. So we call this essentially the basal ganglia. Let's make it, there's a whole network kind of in the middle of your brain. Right. That once you've done something long enough, it can automate. It can say, wait a second, I've seen this a million times, let me do it. So that's, once that's kicked in, you're not learning from it, you're not consciously processing it, it's just happening. Okay. And so it's the same thing as your heartbeat. Your heart's going, but you're not doing anything with it. You're not learning about it. It's not taking your attention. So now bring this back, I guess, with students and learning and teachers. We want kids to be learning, which means multitasking during learning ain't going to be happening. Right. If you want to learn from something, you got to be focused on it. So there's only one thing you can do at a time. So if we circle back to the whole music argument that I always get, would you say instrumental music? Or is even that so you can assume, so this is actually perfect. So go back to what we were just talking about. So long as the music is processed in an automatic fashion, shouldn't matter what it is. It could have lyrics, it could have heavy guitar riffs. The issue is it has to be autopilot,
okay.
which means the music you're listening to has to be stupidly and wildly predictable to you.
Right.
It has to be so recognizable that you can just throw it into the background and let it go. So take, for instance, like I've got a Metallica CD, right? That's loud, that's abrasive, but I've heard it 1,000 times. As soon as I hit play and just let the CD run out, it just becomes noise and I can focus on my work and let that go in the background.
Right.
The problem is most kids don't just play music, they play around with music.
Right.
So they have their iPad on shuffle, and every 3 minutes it's a new song, and then they're skipping to this one, and they're going. Once the predictability is gone, and all of a sudden you're humming along, or you're tapping your toe, or you're I don't like that song, thumbs down.
Right.
That's not noise anymore. That's not autopilot. Now you're focused on it, and now you're multitasking.
Okay.
So the music while studying can work, and it can benefit your attention. It can help a lot of kids block out distractions.
Yeah.
But it only works when that music is wildly predictable to the student, and so it's all like get your playlist, hit play once, and just let it run through. My wife doesn't. So again, it's also, I should point out that's different for everyone. Some people can use music so long as it's predictable. Some people need silence. My wife needs pure silence.
Right.
But because of the predictability, I've got my little work playlist that I've listened to it hundreds of times. My wife doesn't get it because she's like, aren't you bored with that it's the same freaking songs every day? And I'm like, no, I don't hear it anymore. I'm just using it as pure noise in the background to help me focus on what I'm doing. Okay. So she doesn't regulate. So I've listened to it 100 times, but I haven't heard it 100 times. I've just let it kind of play around back there.
Okay. All right, for time's sake, I had two other topics from the book. I'm going to let you pick which one that you kind of want to dive into.
All right, hit me.
So, especially because like going forward with education and all that, the idea of like the importance of errors or the significance of using story. Because I'm all about story, so I like that. But also, I think the idea of error. So I'm going to let you kind of choose that one.
All right, I'll choose the story just because the error can go real long and deep.
Okay.
But I'll just make it simple for everyone. The only way we learn is through error, through discrepancies between our predictions about the world and through reality. That is the mechanism of learning within the brain. You don't screw up, you don't learn. You understand the world, you don't learn. You are so far off base, you don't learn. So we have to live in this sweet spot of error where I think something is going to work, but it's not, and how do I push past that? So you can tell it's a huge topic once you get into how the brain works and why that would happen. But just suffice it to say that if kids are afraid of making errors, heck no. That is everything. That's not everything. That's the only thing. Not only should you not be afraid of it, that's all we should be doing all day, every day, because that's our sign to move forward. But if let's go to the story one.
Well, we might have to schedule another time to kind of talk about that in conjunction with grading.
Oh, we could. Done. I love that because there's too big. Yeah, when you start to put the way the brain functions with errors, and then this concept of bringing in grades and marks and what influence that has on our worldview. Things get super deep. That could be a whole thing in itself.
We'll save that for another day then.
Fair enough. All right, so the stories. Let's go into stories, narrative. So for the longest time, I think people have heard this, that we think in stories. Yeah, cute. We now know that's not a metaphor. That's completely true. The way the brain works, there are two basic processes that the brain goes through whenever it's processing anything. The first is essentially a cause and effect chain. Anytime events happen or information comes in, the brain links them together so that whatever happened now must lead to what's happening next, must lead to what happens after that. So if you think about dreaming, right? When you're awake and try and explain a dream, it's total nonsense. It's embarrassing. It's like I was on a horse and then I was taking a test. I don't know what's going on. But when you're asleep and in a dream, it makes perfect sense. Of course you take a test after a horse. That ability to make sense of a dream when you're in it, that's just the brain making a cause and effect chain. Random things pop into your brain, but your brain goes, okay, that has to cause that. So it ties the two together and it feels like this natural progression. So we have this cause and effect chain. The second thing the brain does is what's called emotional valence. It assigns emotions to every moment. So again, think about dreaming. You've never had an emotionless dream. Dreams are either really scary or awkward or exciting or passionate. And that's just the brain. Once it builds a cause and effect chain, it starts to assign emotions to all these steps. Now, why does this matter? If you think about narrative, what a story has. So let's say we're talking about story as opposed to like poetry or biography. What does an actual just narrative have? It only needs two things. Well, technically it needs three things. The first thing it needs is what's called a physical thrust. Characters have to do things because they were precipitated by something else. Each action has to be caused by another action. This is why very weird books like James Joyce's Ulysses, where you can't find the through line, a lot of people will never be able to read it because it's not really a narrative. It's just creative as hell, but it's not a narrative. So you've got this kind of physical thrust. Characters do things for a reason. You have a psychological thrust. Characters feel a certain way as they're moving through these steps. And the third thing a narrative needs is an audience, someone to pay attention to it. Cool. So think about it. Your two basics of any story, of any narrative, are cause and effect. The way the brain works is cause and effect, emotional valence. The way stories work is physical thrust, psychological thrust. They are identical. The way the brain processes the world is the same way narratives are structured, which means the brain, not metaphorically, very literally, thinks in stories. We think the reason our stories, our narrative is the way it is, isn't because we invented it. It's because that's the constraints the brain required for it to exist. So now we start to see, okay, all those people who say, once you can find a story, once you can find a hook, find a story behind the facts, you are literally riding the rails that already exist in the brain, and it makes it so much easier for your brain to remember, hold on to, organize, and pay attention to it. So if you ever want to boost learning in anything, you find the stories, the narrative behind the facts. How do facts stick together? And watch as everyone sticks with you, and all of a sudden, with no extra effort, things are remembered and understood better. This is the Netflix effect. You remember more from TV shows you watch than you do from the periodic table. Why? Because TV shows are just following the natural pattern of your brain, narrative. The periodic table is just isolated facts, which means if you want to remember the periodic table, find the story. What's the narrative? Either build your own or find the story behind. I always say there's nothing in this world that happened by accident. There was a day when something was understood, and there was a day before it when it wasn't. There's your story for anything. Who discovered each of these things? Who invented this stuff? Get those stories and watch when understanding and comprehension just go through the roof.
Okay. Is there also even the idea of connecting stories? Is there any kind of backing to the idea of even just like creating a story to go along with your information?
Absolutely. So that's what the kind of big joke. If you do like a memory test and you say, okay, here's a list of, say, objects, now visualize them deeply, people will do all right. But if you give them the same list of objects and say, just turn it into a narrative. So now the cat played with this hat, and then they went on a ride in the car, and you build them in there. Watch as your memory soars, like 40 to 70%, I think, better, because you've built that narrative. Again, so even if you make up your own, it's the tying of information together in a cause and effect chain that leads the brain to go, wait, that's how the world is supposed to work. Gimme. So yeah, even I say with the periodic table, if you can't find the stories, invent a dang story. Right. Hydrogen was hanging out with helium, and then they met boron. Like, that's a bad story that I'm telling, but the more detail you can throw it up, probably the better. But yeah, if you make your own story, the same exact process is in play. Okay, cool. All right, so we'll shift real quick. You got a little bit of time left. So you're the director of LME Global, which is Learning Made Easy, right? Yeah. And we just do that's just get to play this game where we do work with teachers, get to work with students, and just help them figure out essentially how the brain learns so they can take agency over this stuff. So students can say, oh, okay, I can do this better. And teachers can say, ooh, if that's how it works, maybe I can try this in my classroom. So just kind of I get to play that bridge between the laboratory and the classroom. All right. And then y'all started putting together YouTube videos, right? Yeah. So if you go on, if you look up my name, Jared Cooney Horvath, on YouTube. I think it's just Jared Cooney on the YouTube. But yeah, every 2 weeks we put out a video called From Theory to Practice. And the idea is pretty simple. All I do is take a new research article relevant to education, and I translate it for teachers and for students and say, okay, here's the noise. Because if you've ever read a research article, they're nightmares to troll through. So most people never touch them. Yeah. Honest to God, if I didn't have to, I wouldn't either. They're horrible. But so I figure, all right, so each week I'll take a new article, trawl through it, and I'll translate, and I'll say, here's the juice, here's the good stuff, here's what it's saying, and here's maybe what it means for us in education. So the one I just finished editing yesterday, I'm really excited about. So it has to do, so this is a pure neuroscience research where a guy was just doing research on creativity in different dementias. So there's one form of dementia where the front part of the brain, the frontal lobe, deteriorates. There's another dementia where the memory networks start to deteriorate in the brain. Okay. And this guy wanted to see, okay, what's the creative differences between these two groups? Pure neuroscience. He's a doctor, he's a clinician, just wanted to see what was going on. And he finds out that whereas the frontal lobe stuff, that diminishes your creativity significantly compared to healthy people, the memory stuff really kills it, like almost destroys it completely. So in his world, that's just an interesting finding that they can now use to diagnose stuff. But what does this mean for us as educators? Now you get to pull that back and translate and say, wait a second, we've been having that creativity debate in education for decades. Thank you, Sir Ken Robinson, for your nonsense school is killing creativity. And now we get to see, is that true? If creativity was a skill, then you would expect the people with the frontal dementia who lose the ability to control their thinking to lose creativity faster than anyone else, but they don't. It's the people who lose their memories that lose creativity faster than everyone else, which means creativity, although it might require some skill, is by and large an information system. It's what knowledge do you have in your brain that determines how creative you can be. No more stuff, get more creativity. So when this debate is, oh, we're teaching kids too much and we're killing their creativity, this type of research comes out and says, no. It looks like the more stuff you know, that opens up your creativity. You stop teaching kids stuff and we can expect their creativity to go down, not up. So it's just one of these brilliant. So this is what all the videos do is we just take a research study that most people will never see and translate it into education and say, how does this fit with kind of some of the topics we've been talking about? Yeah. And some of it's really fun, but some of it, like that one, I think is going to be really controversial because I think some people will get really, that's their bread and butter, and they're going to say, oh no, but wait, but that's what I love is let's bring these ideas out and let's talk about the why behind each of these ideas and see what's happening.
Cool. And one last thing, just a little teaser, right? You're working on a new book, is that right?
It should come out. We're going to submit in the next couple of weeks. It's called 10 Things Schools Get Wrong and How to Get Them Right. So each chapter is a different aspect of school that we all pretty much just take for granted. But what we do then is go into the history of each of these things and show what it's doing to our thinking. So one chapter is on grades. What impact does grades have on our interpretation of the world? One chapter is on the organization. Why do we have 50-minute class periods? Why do we have start school at 8 a.m.? One chapter is on the mindset movement, growth mindset versus fixed mindset, all that stuff. So in evidence-based practice. So each chapter, this one's a little more philosophical than the old book, but this is where I think a lot of these ideas are really going to help teachers reclaim the profession, because there's been no more vilified profession than teaching in the last 100 years. It's the craziest thing. It's like everyone and their mother thinks they know what teachers do because they went to school. It's like, come on, I went to the dentist last week. That doesn't mean I understand dentistry. Yet everyone's like, but I've sat through class. Most people have no clue what teachers do.
Yeah.
So I want us as teachers to step back into that profession and say, all right, world, stop telling us what to do. We know our job. We're the experts in this. Let us do our job. And in order to do that, this book is essentially 10 things that we need to kind of tackle to start to regain that professionalism and say, all right, no, once we start taking control of these decisions, then the world can shout all they want, but they're going to have to recognize us as the experts, and they're going to have to defer to us in these decisions. Just like you can yell at your doctor all day, but at the end of the day, when the doctor says X, you're going to do it.
Right.
That's what teachers, you can yell at us all day, but once the teacher says X, I want us to have that respect that they go, yeah, all right, whatever, and they're going to do it. So that's my goal with this book, is to start to bring those kind of bigger changes about.
Yeah, I look forward to that. That sounds really interesting.
It's going to be intense. So you read the chapter on grades, yeah?
No, I read the chapter on computers.
Oh, on the computer ones. Oh, yes. So you see, it's a little more.
Yeah.
They're like bigger, heavier topics, but they battle the big questions. Like in computers, everyone who's been saying, they've got so much potential, and they make learning more fun. And we tackle all those issues and say, is that meaningful? What are you actually talking about when you say it has potential? Is that a worthwhile thing?
Yeah, it was definitely thought-provoking. And I was like, some of those things that you just haven't really thought about a whole lot. Because you said, you just kind of take it for granted, I think, sometimes.
And that's what one of the weird things about school, and we were talking about this decades ago when I was still doing it, was is most of what we do is just because that's what we did yesterday. Mm-hmm. And with all the crap we have to do, most of us just don't have time to stop and think.
Yeah.
And we're so busy just running around making sure the kids are healthy, safe, learning, marking, filling out all the dang bureaucratic paperwork from my bosses, that we very rarely get to stop and go, wait a second, why am I doing this? What is the function of this, and is it serving the purpose that I really want to be achieving? And so, that's what this one goes into, those questions, and says, nice. All right, we don't always have time to think about these, so let's lay them out in one book and then go, cool, what's resonating, what's not, what can we change?
Awesome. Well, cool. Jared, I really appreciate you being on here, and it's good talking to you.
No, thank you for having me on. I hope that all came out well and everyone learned a thing or two, had a good time.
Definitely. So for this week's question of the week, just reflecting on the conversation that we had, I'm just curious to know, what are some of these ideas that you think you could implement really well in your class? A lot of these are some basic things that we learned in education courses, but knowing kind of the theory behind them and the way that it actually works, what are some ways that you can apply these concepts in your classroom? You can tweet your responses, use the hashtag 8BitCrew, or you can post any longer entries on the comment section of the episode page at 8bitinstructor.com. Well, that will just about do it for this episode. Many thanks to Jared Cooney Horvath for joining me today. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at JCHorvath, or check out his YouTube page where he posts videos. Super helpful stuff, looking at research and how the research can be applied into the classroom. Also, I did have to cut out a little bit of our conversation. We got a little deep into some video game talk, so if that's not you, don't worry about it. But if you are a video game person, that conversation will be added to the end of this episode so that you can just listen to it on your own. And, if you're interested in anything like that, shoot me a tweet. I love talking that kind of stuff. Thanks so much for listening today. Make sure to connect with me on Twitter at Comic Socks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to hit subscribe so that you can receive new episodes as they come out, and leave a review in your podcast app for me. More importantly, share it with others, folks that you know that would like to improve their craft and share ideas and get connected with other teachers who enjoy trying new things in class. Also, if you want to support the show, visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/8bitinstructor. So until next week, keep leveling up that craft, and may your sword stay sharp and your shields hold strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ComicSocks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. See you next week. All right, one last thing, just a fun thing to end everything off with. So, favorite game. What you got for me?
So this is 8-bit. So we're going video game versus live game?
Any game. Now, for me, it's 8-Bit Instructor is kind of like my personal deal. I grew up playing video games and all that kind of stuff. So it could be a video game if that's your thing. But if people
let's go video. What's your favorite game?
Oh, maybe
you start.
Me. I'm supposed to be asking the questions here. Mine is kind of a toss-up between franchises, actually.
Okay.
So I'm a huge fan of Legend of Zelda.
Fair enough. Hard to deny. That's always good.
Several ideas for several episodes of things from the Legend of Zelda kind of franchise that could potentially be learning kind of experience, like how the process works. Going into a dungeon and figuring it out and all that. But I'm also a really big Final Fantasy guy.
Okay, I've never played any of the Final Fantasies.
I won't hold it against you. But no, what really got me into it is the storyline. They're really great stories. A lot of them are. Some of them.
Now, was that a turn-based? Because I started playing XCOM a couple of years ago, and I loved that because it was a turn-based video game.
A lot of the original ones are. The last, let's see, there was a couple of them. 12 was like a gambit system where you could set up actions that it would do in certain like situations, and you run around, and eventually like I got to the point in that one where I was running around, I wasn't even have to do anything. All the gambits were fighting for me and all that kind of stuff.
That doesn't sound fun. What'd you do with your game today? Nothing. I just watched it. Just watched it unfold.
But again, I'm playing because of the story a lot of times. So, but most of them are turn based.
That's what I loved the XCOM. That was the first time I'd ever played one of those turn-based video games. I'm like, oh, that's fun. But if I gotta go, my favorite all time is probably NHL PA 95.
Okay.
We played that so much growing up. That was when, I grew up, Pittsburgh is where I'm from originally, so that's the Penguins are my thing.
Yeah.
God, I cannot tell you how many controllers we busted throwing them at. Because remember, the TVs back in the day we used to have a full glass screen, so you could dink things off of them. It wouldn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
So anytime you'd lose, you would dink your controller off the front of and the controller would end up shattering. So that was my Sega Genesis NHL PA. That was my thing.
Yeah, I can't even count how many times my mom yelled at me when she heard the controller thunking off of the TV screen.
This is what I love. Kids can't do that no more.
No,
you break a controller, that's like a couple $100, and the TV is shattering. It's like, oh, no. You're going to get in trouble with that. Back in the day, no, that's just what we did. Man, those things were tanks, though.
I know.
We used to slam. I had a Sega Master System, which was before the Genesis. I used to slam my fist into it. That thing still's in the attic. It works just fine today. Now, I feel like with PlayStations and stuff, if you sneeze, that thing is going to give you a red light and break.